Most people can easily survive the winter weather by layering up and turning on the heater. But it's a bit more complicated for birds. For this month's Chirp Chat, Lake Effect's Xcaret Nuñez spoke with regional conservation specialist Toby Seegert at the Milwaukee County Zoo. He says winter is a great time to keep the backyard bird feeders stocked so you can help birds stay nourished throughout the season. He also discusses how the county zoo takes care of wild birds year-round.
I am so excited to be chatting with you today at the Milwaukee County Zoo. And Toby, some people might not know this, but the zoo doesn't just care for its own animals, it also cares for wild birds. Can you tell me about the Wild Birds program?
Yeah, for sure. The Society supports the Wild Birds program. We do weekly point count surveys, so I'll go out with a bunch of volunteers and we go birding every Tuesday morning. We also do, in the wintertime, we'll do Project Feeder Watch. So we've got a bunch of different bird feeder stations throughout the zoo. So next time you're visiting the zoo, take a peek, see if you can find the feeders located around the walkways. But we're in charge of filling all of those feeders, and that helps support the birds in the winter months especially because they have trouble finding food that time of year. We also support a MODIS program, so we've got a MODIS tower on zoo grounds, which is pretty cool. It's this newer technology, so newer than bird banding, but they attach these little chips to the back of a bird, and it allows us to track their migration, which is pretty cool.
Whoa, lots of different things. So do you get to do that, the MODIS?
So I'm working towards hopefully getting to do that in the future. But right now we'll send staff down to Belize and they help deploy MODIS trackers down there with the hopes that those birds are then migrating back up to Wisconsin, which is pretty cool. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So something that you'd mentioned, you said one way that the zoo cares for wild birds is by putting out plenty of feeders, but I was interested, with winter coming up, do you put feeders away? It seems like we don't.
No, so I actually keep the feeders out year round, and you'll see that there'll be a lot of different species that'll come to the feeders. You'll notice that robins have been sticking around. Historically, robins will migrate because it's all about food resources. But as, climate change is impacted and food availability is still available for robins to eat, they'll stay around year-round. So you might actually see robins in the winter now. Same thing with Canada geese. Those stick around year-round quite often. So keeping up those feeders does provide a lot of food for those birds, and they kind of become reliant almost on those feeders too.
Right. I was going to ask you, why is it important to, have these feeders out, especially in the winter time?
Yeah, so keeping them out, it provides that food resource. They eat a lot of seeds and rely on a lot of the plants that are blooming during the spring and the summer. And in the fall and the winter, a lot of those plants are done blooming, and there's not as much seed availability. And so they're out competing each other for what limited resources are available. And so providing those extra resources, extra food actually really does help support those birds. So,
and I feel like one myth, I guess you could call it, is if you do keep your bird feeders out, you're not making birds not migrate.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. So if a bird wants to migrate, it'll migrate. Its body will tell it that it's time to move on. Keeping those feeders out doesn't keep the birds there longer. It just helps support them. So if they do choose to be there longer, or if they decided that they don't want to migrate, they'll still have those resources and that energy to keep going through the winter.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And so what type of bird feeders and feed do you recommend people keep out?
So in the winter, I recommend suet always, just because it is a higher fat content, and a lot of birds really are looking for that higher fat content. I'll also put out in the winter black oil sunflower seed. It's what we put out here at the zoo as well. And then a lot of finch species really like the Niger seed, so we'll also be putting that out year round as well for them. And those all tend to have a higher fat content, which the birds really like. So.
Right. And another resource is, should we keep water out for birds throughout the winter?
Yeah, so that's another really, really valuable resource, especially in the cold weather, because there's not as much open water. And so keeping a heated bird bath is really, really helpful, especially in the winter as a lot of stuff starts to freeze, as temperatures start to drop. So you can also, if you have a metal bird bath or a plastic bird bath, they actually do even sell heated bird bath inserts that you can put into an existing bird bath if you don't want to go out and buy a new one. But they do also just sell heated bird baths. But yeah, providing water is really, really important too.
So what are the types of birds that tend to stick around for the winter time?
We get a lot of cardinals. A lot of people love seeing cardinals. We also have a lot of chickadees. We'll get a lot of different finches. So we have goldfinches. Those tend to stick around year round. They don't look as pretty and bright yellow. This time of year, they're more drab and olive colored, but they do stick around year round. So if you're seeing birds and you're like, I don't know what that is, it might be a goldfinch, that you're just not aware that it's a goldfinch. It looks a little different. We also get house finches this time of year, house sparrows, robins. They tend to stick around occasionally. You'll also see a lot of woodpeckers this time of year. So red-bellied woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, they're all feeder favorites. So I tend to see them quite often at our suet feeders. They absolutely go bananas for suet. So yeah, that's oftentimes what we'll see.
And why is it that the goldfinch might look a little drabby or like a little brown bird?
Yeah, so goldfinches get what's called alternate plumage. So in the springtime, the males will molt and they get that really nice, vibrant yellow and nice, vibrant black cap. And that's to attract the ladies, be more attractive. And then when they're done with the breeding season, they'll get a little bit more drab. They molt again to become more drab so that they are less detectable by predators. Because the duller olive color blends in really well with like all the dead vegetation this time of year, and that helps prevent them from getting predated on.
Wow, that's amazing. So where are some good type of places to place your feeder, like closer to trees or like, yeah, what kind of habitat or environment?
That's a very good question. So if you're putting them in your backyard or near any kind of building with a window, we tend to recommend that people have their feeder either less than 3 feet away from the window or greater than 10 feet away from the window. And that's just so that when birds are flying, if they happen to be flying the direction of your window, if it's less than 3 feet, they're not able to get enough momentum to hit and injure themselves. And if it's greater than 10 feet, they're less likely to smack into the window. But other than that, I mean, you can put them up just about anywhere. People will even spread like suet. They sell suet that you can spread onto trees and that kind of stuff. And woodpeckers will go crazy for it. You might attract some squirrels too, but they like it. So
Nice. So what are some things people should keep in mind when keeping their feeders out to keep birds safe?
yeah, I recommend this with any bird feeder. You want to regularly clean them out. And that's just something that you should regularly be doing anywho, because it's good for the bird's health. And it also helps decrease disease transmission. So different kinds of diseases will pass among birds if they're, feeding at the same feeder, that kind of stuff. So going through and cleaning stuff out, removing food if it's moldy. That usually is a bigger problem in the summer when it gets like really wet and humid. And typically in the winter it tends to be drier, but it really does depend. But making sure that you're filling them and cleaning it out regularly.
And you mentioned that another way the zoo cares for wild birds is by doing weekly count surveys. What are you monitoring for when you're doing those?
Yeah, so we're kind of checking biodiversity. We go to 11 different stations throughout the zoo, and we stop for 5 minutes. I'll set a timer, and we basically sit there and look and listen for birds. And I'll record every single species that we've either seen or heard. Also, we'll run Merlin, which is a free app. If you don't already have it, I recommend it. It's a lot of fun. And we'll run it on all of our phones just in case there's something that we didn't hear. And I denote in my notes whether we saw, heard, or if Merlin picked up the species. And all that information gets put into a database that I maintain. And then we also upload all of it to eBird so that it can be used by scientists and researchers to kind of study bird populations as well.
Nice. And how have you noticed the winter weather affect your weekly bird counts in any way?
Yeah, so that's kind of the cool part. We've been doing this for a little over 2 years now. So we've got some comparable, trends that we can see from year to year, which is pretty cool. We're able to notice, seasonality wise, like you get different species during, depending on what time of year it is. We also have noticed, like, depending on if they're doing any kind of maintenance, that impacts, like, what species we're seeing in certain areas, that kind of stuff, which is really cool. And it's helpful for us because then we can inform ground staff, hey, this is what we're seeing, like, this is how it's impacting, like, the biodiversity of the area, that kind of stuff. And so we can kind of open up a conversation and kind of have that dialogue about conservation impacts, too.
I know the Milwaukee County Zoo also opened a backyard birdwalk exhibit last year. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So it's a pretty cool exhibit. I recommend next time you're visiting the zoo to come and take a peek at it. It's really nice in the summer. It's got a bunch of picnic tables, benches, that kind of stuff. But essentially what it is it's an area to learn about bird conservation. So we've got a bunch of different sections of the bird walk. So the first section, you've got a bunch of different types of nest boxes, things that you can actually even put up in your own yard if you would like to. We've got an entire section dedicated to bird feeders. So it's got just about every single kind of bird feeder that you could possibly imagine in that section, and explaining what species are attracted to what kind of feeder. We've also got a section dedicated to bird strikes. So it's a giant window display that shows all these different options of things that you can put on your windows at home to help prevent bird strikes, because they are a significant killer of birds, unfortunately. But it's a really cool just way to learn about conservation and how you can help conserve stuff in your backyard. And we've got a ton of native plants planted back there too. So it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful in the summer. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to visit. And I'm listening to you talk, and I know we just kind of touched on this, but for some people who are listening, how does this wild birds program go hand in hand with what the zoo's doing?
Yeah, so it all contributes to conservation work, right? So honestly, what we're doing is we're studying the property, what we're doing here in our own home. Because even though we participate in all of this global conservation work, because we have a lot of, global species here as part of our collection, it's also really important to conserve what we have here. And our zoo is one of the few zoos that really doesn't have a whole lot of developed areas. We've got a lot of wooded areas on the zoo property, which is really, really cool. It's something that people really love about our zoo. It's one of the biggest features that people say that they enjoy. And so we kind of have something special here, and kind of taking a look at what we have and how we can help support the species that are calling this place home. Because even though we've got, the animals in our collection, it's important to take care of what we have here too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, at the end of every Chirp Chat, I love for guests to shine a spotlight on a bird for the month.
Sure.
I am so sorry to put you on the spot. I know it's really hard, but what's a bird you'd like to highlight this month?
I'm a woodpecker guy. I really like red-bellied woodpeckers.
Yeah, talk about them.
Yeah. So they really don't have a lot of red on their belly, but there's already a red-headed woodpecker, so they can't call them red-headed woodpeckers. But they have a nice red patch on the back of their head. They've got the nice gradient black and white speckling on their backside. And they're just really funny. They're charismatic. I oftentimes will find them, hopping around the tree, squawking at me. Sometimes when I'm filling feeders, there'll be one sitting in the tree, squawking at me because he knows I'm filling the feeder and he wants to get in first dibs. They're just very charismatic. Woodpeckers are just a lot of fun, I find. They make some really interesting calls too. So
yeah, does a red belly make an interesting call in any way?
Yeah, I feel like almost every woodpecker species sounds like it's laughing. That's what I always feel like their calls sound like. At least the longer versions of their calls, it kind of just sounds like they're having a chuckle. And downy, hairy, red-bellied, northern flickers, they all have a little bit of a different laugh, just like people. So I think that that's a lot of fun to watch out for too.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that with me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Toby, I really appreciate you for speaking with me today and helping me learn how to take care of birds this winter.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to help.
Toby Seegert is the Regional Conservation Specialist for the Zoological Society of Milwaukee. He spoke with Xcaret's Nuñez for a monthly series we call Chirp Chat.